Welcome. I'm Patrick Brady.
I'm Orion Breen, and this is
Maine
Better.
Today we have Senator Angus King joining us. How are you doing today, Senator?
I'm fine. This is a very timely conversation because we're right in the middle of infrastructure discussions as we speak. I've been in and out of meetings on it, and all I can tell you right now is that we're close, but we don't have a deal. And the major stumbling block, which won't surprise you, is how to pay for everything. The bill that's being worked on by what they call the G20, which is now, I guess, the G21, made up of 11 Republicans, 9 Democrats, and me. That's the group. And the issue that's hanging people up, of course, is how to pay for everything. It's focused on what we would refer to as hard infrastructure, roads and bridges, airports, transit, water systems. There's some energy pieces in it. It's I think, a very strong package. It's not everything the president had in his original package. There are some pieces that seem to be agreed to. And I can't make commitments here because it's all very fluid. But the issue that seems to be dividing or slowed the discussion is indexing the gas tax. There's support in the Congress for doing that. The White House says no, and they're pretty adamant about that. The president considers that a tax increase on ordinary Americans, and he's committed to not do that. So the question is, how do we fill the gap that when you take that money out, what will fill that gap? And everybody's looking for change under the cushions of the couch to try to put a package together. So as I say, I think we're close, but it's not done yet. And then even then, there's no guarantee that the rest of the Senate or the House will agree to what we're proposing. The negotiations between the Republicans and the White House broke down. So right now, this is the only game in town. There's a pretty substantial agreement on what's in the package and part of what we call the pay for, but not everything. So in the next few days, we're going to try to come to some resolution. It won't be passed. The Congress is going into recess tomorrow or Friday for a couple of weeks into the July 4th, and then coming back in July, and that's when this would probably hit the floor.
The interest in infrastructure, the energy that sort of surrounds all these discussions, it seems different this time around. It seems like there's actually a lot of, there's certainly bipartisan support right now for this specific initiative, but what do you think is contributing to that change in energy this time around?
Well, this is the same group that put together the COVID package back in December. At that time, we call it the 908 group because 908 was the dollar, 908 billion was the dollar amount. And it's a group of people that, like to try to get things done. And you'd recognize a lot of the names, Christian Sinema, Joe Manchin, Rob Portman, Susan Collins, myself, Chris Coons. I'm trying to think, Mark Warner. It's sort of a centrist group from both parties. And as I say, the question is whether we can build out, because the progressive wing of the Democratic Party wants much more in the bill, and whether or not the Republicans will accept it's a larger package than what they were originally proposing. So it's not a sure thing, but I do think, as you say, there's some energy to get this done. I think everybody realizes we need to do an infrastructure package. The country needs it. It's important both for jobs and for just, having decent roads, highways, transit, bridges, all of those things. I think everybody realizes how important it is. And there's also, to be honest, a desire to try to show the country that occasionally we can do things working together. I think that's part of the motivation as well.
I know it's not all fleshed out, but what pieces that you see being in the final bill would be most advantageous for the state of Maine?
There's no doubt that there will be a significant amount of money for highways, for bridges and basic infrastructure, I think, and that's important in Maine. I will never forget, this is a little anecdote, when I was first elected governor, I'd been in office maybe 3 months, and the bridge between Lewiston and Auburn collapsed. A structural piece went down and the bridge was out of commission, and we had to get permission from the Turnpike Authority to use the Turnpike Bridge for people from Lewiston and Auburn to get back and forth. And so I said to my Commissioner of Transportation, John Melrose, I said, so how are we doing on bridge maintenance? You know, where are we? Give me a report. He came back about 2 weeks later, and I'll never forget. He said, well, Governor, according to our studies, we're going to get to every bridge in Maine for maintenance once every 167 years. I will never forget that moment. And I suspect now we're doing a little bit better than that. But I think what's most important to Maine are two pieces. One, bridges and highways, and the other is broadband. I think expansion of broadband, which is in the package, is the single most important infrastructure improvement that we can make in Maine today. Because we learned from the pandemic that we have lots of people in our rural areas who don't have any connection, who aren't connected, who don't have broadband, and that compromises students who need to communicate with their schools, seniors who want to do telehealth, which was a huge deal during the pandemic, and finally people who work at home. We had thousands, I've never seen a number, but I know it's probably tens of thousands of people in Maine working from home during the pandemic, and those of us who had decent broadband sort of took it for granted. But if you were out in a rural town without it, you were stuck. And so it's a serious economic problem. So broadband is on everybody's list, which is a good thing. We're now sort of working on how to do it, how to fund it, how to send the money out. I have a bill with Rob Portman, who's also in this group, and Michael Bennett, the Democratic Senator from Colorado, called the Bridge Act. And our approach is pretty simple. Send the money to the states. Let them decide how best to spend it, that the states know best what their needs are. And Maine, as you know, has just created a new, the Maine Connectivity Authority to handle the funds coming in. There's over 100 million coming from the recent CARES Act bill, and then this would go on top of that. So that's my approach is really simple. We've been funneling money through the Department of Agriculture down here, through the Federal Communication Commission. To be honest, I don't think it's worked very well. And I don't think the money has ended up going where it really needs to go. So what we're pushing is that it should go directly to the states and let them decide where their highest levels of need are. And then they can work with municipalities to develop the systems that work for whether it's Washington County, or last night I had a Zoom with Aroostook County leaders. So those are the two biggest pieces that I think are of importance to Maine.
The disagreement over how to pay for it and talking about the indexing to the gas fund, have there been any other solutions thrown out?
I was at a meeting in the Oval Office, believe it or not, with the president about 6 weeks ago, and there were 10 of us and from both parties. And the Republicans at that time were strong on what are called user fees, gas tax. And the president said no. So, and then indexing was a way of trying to bridge the gap, because it wouldn't be an immediate increase, but it would help the gas tax to keep pace with inflation. As you know, the federal gas tax hasn't been increased since 1993. It's lost close to 30% of its purchasing power since then. And as you may recall, when I was governor, we indexed the gas tax in Maine in about the year 2000. Unfortunately, one of my successors repealed that, so we're back stuck with the gas tax being to the point where it just won't pay the bills anymore. And then you have to go through the process of increasing it. So anyway, one that I proposed that does seem to be in the package is what's called the tax gap. And it turns out that there's anywhere, the estimates range from 200 billion a year to $1 trillion a year of uncollected taxes, particularly from high income earners who don't pay their taxes. We're not talking about legal tax avoidance. We're talking about cheating. Yeah. And so one of the proposals that's in the bill, and it looks like it may stay in, is additional funding for the IRS to do a better job of following up on people that aren't paying their taxes. It's hard to advocate for more money for the IRS. On the other hand, if people who aren't rightfully paying their taxes, only two things happen in that case. One is the rest of us have to make it up, or we have to borrow it from our kids. And I don't think that's right. I think Maine people generally pay their taxes. Most working people have no choice. It's withholding, and they get a W-2 at the end of the year, and the taxes are already paid. So these are folks that are making millions of dollars and aren't paying the share that they're supposed to be. And so that's one of the pieces to pay the cost. And there are several others, but that's all to be determined. I got to tell you, I'm happy that at least we're talking about paying for it. It's not too unusual around here where we just say, well, we're going to borrow this money. We're going to pass it on to our kids. It's hard to find the money to pay for these things, but I think that's the way we ought to be doing it. That's much more honest.
Are you splitting the difference between sort of the broadband scope of the bill?
The president's proposal on broadband was $100 billion. That's going to be reduced in the final package to something less. I think something less would be adequate.
I mean, the original bill had a lot with this different kind of infrastructure that Biden was talking about with child care or elder care. Is that likely to be stripped out of this and then potentially would be proposed in separate legislation?
Yes, I think that's exactly what's going to happen. Yes, he had a very large piece for child care and also for home care for elders, which is an area that's tremendously important as the society ages. The home care industry is really hurting. The turnover rate of employees is very high, and these are the people that are taking care of our parents. So, but that I think is going to be taken up in separate legislation.
You mentioned gas tax. Has there been any discussion about VMT, vehicle miles traveled, how that could be implemented in the future? What with the transition to electric vehicles, you can't rely on a gas tax forever to pay for the roads.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I myself drive a plug-in hybrid, and so I'm a free rider, literally, on the highway system. I think that's got to come, but I tell you, it's everybody down here is very uncomfortable about that. We're moving more and more to either high mileage hybrid vehicles or electric vehicles, and someone pointed out to me that an electric car is heavier than a conventional internal combustion. So in terms of wear and tear on the road, an electric car is just as much or more. And right now, people driving electric cars pay zero in terms of support for the roads. The gas tax has always been, I've always thought of it as a user fee. It's called a tax, but it's really you pay for what you use. And it worked for 100 years, but now because gas was what made the car go. But now if we're moving toward electric vehicles, then we've got to refigure that idea to be sure that users are paying for the demands they make on the highway. And ironically, although everyone around here is worried about increasing the gas tax and what the impact would be, there are lots of studies that bad roads cost people more than they would pay in an added gas tax. I had in my office a year or two ago the representative of the Maine Truckers Association, and they were advocating for a federal gas tax increase. And I was surprised. I said, you guys pay a lot of gas tax. Why do you want it to increase? They said, because the roads are costing us way more than the gas tax would. And people don't think about that, but when you have a bent rim or a flat tire or something that knocks your alignment out, one repair will equal a whole year of an extra few cents on the gas tax.
You're on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. Has there been any talk about stuff like biofuels? And in Maine, you have waste products from the forestry industry into liquid fuels for heating oil and other products.
I haven't heard much discussion about that in the committee, but I think I've had a lot of discussion in Maine, and I think we're on the edge of some pretty exciting new uses of forest products, whether it's for goo that you use for 3D printing coming from out of bioproducts from the forest, or as you say, biofuels for fuel. There's a new company opening up in Madison using wood products for home insulation, what they call CLT, cross-laminated timber for building larger buildings. So there's a lot of really exciting activity going on, both in the energy side and in the utilization of the forest. That's one of my big pushes is, we're going to support our traditional pulp and paper industry, but let's also find new uses for forest products because we're sitting on a gold mine of fiber. Maine is the most forested state in the nation. And so let's maximize the value and the jobs that come out of that. And a lot of that is going to come from research and from new products.
Should we ask a fun question, Orion? Can't be all business.
Don't ask me my favorite place in Maine. That's an unfair question to a politician. I can't answer that.
What was your first car?
The first car was about a 1954 Volkswagen, and it was so old that it didn't have the turn signal. When you turn the signal, a little arrow flipped out next to your head on the side of the car. And there was no gas gauge. There was a lever that when you ran out of gas, you turn the lever. There was a reserve tank, and I'll never forget that car. And it had a lot of problems. My father called it Hitler's Revenge because it was an early Volkswagen in the 50s. I remember the clutch cable broke, and I felt very accomplished at the age of about 16 replacing the clutch cable on that Volkswagen. Those were the days when you could work on your own car. I had I was the only owner of a 1967 Volvo 122S, which now resides at the Boothbay Railway Museum car collection. It's now 54 years old, and you can see it up in Boothbay at the Railway Museum. It was a classic car of Maine in the early 70s. It's a very recognizable design, and I gave it to the museum a few years ago. I owned the car for over 50 years.
What other things beyond transportation are you most excited about hopefully getting accomplished this year?
Well, of course, all the news lately is about voting rights, and I am very much involved in that discussion with Joe Manchin and others, trying to find a path to basically protecting democracy. It's unfortunate what's going on because I always thought the whole idea was more people voting. When I was governor, I had a bet with Jesse Ventura, who was then the governor of Minnesota, about which state could have the highest turnout in the next election. Like I said, I thought, more people voting was a good thing. And now we've got all these laws being passed around the country that are designed to diminish the number of people that vote. And it's all in the name of voter fraud, which is a vanishingly small problem. I did some research in Maine. I could turn up 3 or 4 cases in the last 10 or 20 years out of about 5 million votes, to diminish people's right to vote. I just don't think that's the right way the country should be going. So that's an issue that I'm very engaged with. I'm hopeful. And there's some other aspects of that: gerrymandering, the dark money, these ads that we see in TV where you don't know who's sponsoring them. All I say is, let's make people tell us who they are. If they're spending millions of dollars to try to influence our vote in Maine, I think we have a right to know who it is that's trying to do that. What I told the committee down here is that you're not allowed to go to a Maine town meeting with a bag over your head. Who you are is an important part of the information. And the same thing on this voting rights thing. Maine has all the things that they're talking about as being this horrible problem. We have mail-in voting, we have drop boxes, we have no voter ID, we have registration on election day, and we also have little to no fraud. I don't mean to go on and on, but that's something I'm very much engaged in right now. It's been great fun to be with you guys, and thanks for what you're doing. And I'm hoping one way or another we're going to get some of that highway money and broadband money into Maine sooner rather than later.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Angus.
Yes, thank you guys.
Yeah.
Talk to you later.